Hello, and welcome to New Scientist Weekly, your curated selection of the week's science stories. I'm Christy Taylor in New York.
And I'm Timothy Revel in London. This week on the show, we'll be talking about a possible reason as to why dark energy has been behaving so mysteriously, plus whether you should be worried about bird flu, and how to charge a quantum battery.
You know, because we've all got those right now.
Yeah, did I mention that we're recording this podcast from the future? We've also got good news about the rise of renewable energy worldwide.
But first, we are starting right at the top with a life form of the week, and it's a story about some surprisingly sophisticated communication. Communication in the animal kingdom that researchers now think could be the closest thing to human language yet. And on top of that, it's a real treat for your ears. Have a listen to this. All right, health reporter Claire Wilson is here. Claire, who's that talking?
Yeah, those sounds are clicks made by sperm whales from the East Caribbean off the coast of Dominica. Now, we've long known that these whales use steady streams of these clicks for hunting, like they hunt deep sea squid. They're using echolocation there, like bats do, but their clicks are audible, unlike bats. Now, the whales often give also these kind of short, irregularly spaced bursts of clicks like you just heard. And it's always seemed like they might be communicating to each other. It's usually when there's more than one whale there, maybe two whales will both be clicking away together at each other.
I mean, that sounds intriguing. It sounds like there could be something there, but how do we actually start to decipher what they might mean?
Well, we haven't yet. But we have taken the first step down the road to understanding what they're saying with help from these little recording devices that they attach to the whales just with suction cups. And after analysing several years of recordings from about 60 different whales, researchers have come up with what they call the sperm whale phonetic alphabet. So similar to a human language where we put many letters together to make words, the whales seem to add different click patterns together to make longer sequences. And that's really important if you ask people who study animal communication systems, because once you can start adding building blocks together, that gives you a much bigger capacity for different meanings. And if you had to have, say, a different sound for each meaning or a different gesture.
I mean, that really is amazing. There's this long history of us thinking that, there are certain traits that are uniquely human, such as tool use, only for us to then find out later that other animals do them too, and we aren't really that special. And this maybe seems like an example of that. Apart from us, do we know of any other species that have an alphabet as opposed to a sound for each meaning?
As far as we know, no, there are no other examples. But I should say the researchers have not yet shown that the whales are, in fact, doing this, conveying meaning. They've just shown that their calls are complex enough to have the capacity for doing that, for conveying meaning. So the next much harder step is to start seeing if we can understand the different calls. But obviously that would require observing the whale's behavior before and after their conversations.
And I guess that would be quite hard considering how much of this happens underwater.
Yes. But they have actually had their first breakthrough.
Okay, yes. Go on.
And so they think that they have decoded the whale equivalent of a full stop or a period for you, Christy.
Thank you.
Or if we were on walkie-talkies, we might say something and then say over to convey that it's the other person's turn to speak. So the usual calls are a series of clicks, say about 5 or so, maybe sometimes a few more, sometimes a few less, irregularly spaced sequence of clicks with a specific rhythm. But sometimes the whales just add an extra click, and it can be at the end of a sequence or also just at the beginning. And we think that means it's your turn to speak now. I finished. So we've learned that just from observing the whales' kind of turn-taking behavior.
It's so easy to get really philosophical about language, cognition, and how that happens in animals. But this really sounds like a concrete translation of a sperm whale word, or at least a, as you say, punctuation mark.
Yeah, I know. I'm so excited about seeing what they find out next. I got a bit carried away when I was talking to the scientists. I proposed to them that they start playing recordings back to the whales to see what happens. They weren't very impressed by that idea, I'm afraid. They said, no, that might scare the whales. We've got to learn a lot more before we can even consider doing that.
Ethics, schmethics. All right, well, why don't we then maybe finish up with a little bit more of a listen to all of that chit-chat we were...
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, please.
Over.
I was about to say
I think they were saying, can I have some squid for dinner, please?
Whale out.
Oh.
Well,
Up next, we have a new explanation as to why dark energy may be acting so weird. Dark energy is that mysterious force that's accelerating the expansion of our universe, and we know very little about it as it's not directly observable. And last month, with the release of the biggest 3D map of the universe ever created, there were hints that even what we do know is perhaps wrong. And that map suggested that dark energy is changing over time, which contradicts the standard model of cosmology, our current best description of the universe. Well, the map from the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, known as DESI, has been perplexing scientists since it came out, and they've been racing to try to understand it. Now, we might have a potential solution. So space reporter Leah Crane joins us to explain it all. Hi, Leah.
Hello.
Okay, so it's fair to say there's been some chat about dark energy recently. Can you just give us a quick summary of where things stand?
Yeah, sure. So DESI is an instrument over at Kitt Peak Observatory in Arizona that is building this huge map of the large-scale structure of where all the galaxies are. And it's been collecting data since 2019, but about a month ago, it dropped some new data, and that data suggested that dark energy might be changing, maybe even weakening over time, which could mean the expansion of the universe is changing correspondingly to the dark energy. And that might mean the whole history of the expansion of the universe is different from what we thought. And on a more sort of fundamental level, it could mean we need some brand new physics outside of the standard model of cosmology.
About time. I've been waiting for some new physics.
Yeah, I mean, we get possible new physics pretty often, but pretty rarely do we get actual new physics. But the potential new physics here is really fun.
So go on then, tell us about it. What might we be in store for?
So there's a bunch of potential explanations for the DESI results, but I've been looking into two in particular. And the first one involves letting dark matter and dark energy interact with each other.
and this isn't a given, right? We don't just assume this already happens, even though they both have dark in the name, like no relation.
Right. The dark part of those names refers to the fact that we can't detect them directly. So maybe invisible matter and invisible energy might have been more appropriate names. But in the standard model of cosmology, they don't interact at all. So letting them interact could affect how the universe would expand. And the specific idea is that energy would be able to transfer from dark matter to dark energy, essentially a really small amount of dark matter turning into dark energy. And I can forecast your next question, which is how, but we don't really know. There are a lot of proposals for how it could work, but in the meantime, these researchers were just looking at whether, if this thing happened, it would fix the problem in the data, which it can.
Great. So you said there were two possible explanations. What's the other one?
So the other one I find really fun. It's dark radiation, which is like regular radiation in that it's made up of massless particles like photons, but it doesn't interact much or at all with normal matter or normal radiation.
So ghosts, is this like the neutrinos of radiation then?
Yeah, basically ghosts. It could be neutrinos, which are not quite massless, or it could be photons. But if you get back to the expansion of the universe, the dark radiation could help explain what we've been seeing in the DESI results. So in this explanation, dark radiation would be most important in the early universe when everything was dominated by radiation. And just adding a little bit more would have sped up expansion back then. So now it would be slowing down, as we can see in the DESI results.
Okay, so conveniently these two ideas, they match the DESI results. But what about anything else? Is there any other evidence out there that it might actually explain what's going on?
Direct evidence, not so much, or at all. But both of them could also solve another big problem in cosmology, which is called the Hubble tension. And the gist of that problem is that we have two ways to measure the expansion rate of the universe. They don't agree with one another, and either of these changes to our model of cosmology could bring those measurements just a little bit closer together.
Okay, so there's stuff that needs fixing, but we're just not entirely sure if these are the right fixes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The DESI results are also far from conclusive that we need any of this. It may not be the case that dark energy is behaving weirdly at all. So even if we do need new physics, there are a lot of possible explanations. But to prove we need those explanations, we'll have new observations from DESI and a bunch of other projects in the next few months and years.
If you want a more philosophical look at how we talk about climate change, Culture Lab this week features Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Elizabeth Kolbert. She talked to me about her new book called H is for Hope and what she's learned from decades on the global warming beat.
That's already in your feed there to listen to. Plus, have you ever wished that the Milky Way had more arms?
Always, every day, we need an octopus-shaped galaxy, Tim.
Yeah, that would be great. And of course, the cosmic duo of Leia and Chelsea at Dead Planet Society have been looking into this. And you can hear what they found out next Tuesday about what it might take to make a many-armed Milky Way.
Up next, bird flu is a pathogen of concern in the U.S. this spring, as dairy cows and one dairy worker have tested positive. But do researchers have the information they need to track how the virus may be spreading or evolving? And how concerned should we be? We have Grace Wade, our health reporter, here to discuss the outbreak with us. Hey, Grace.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so set us up. Could you tell us first what we know about the outbreak so far, what the scope is?
Yeah, so as of now, dairy cows in 36 herds across 9 U.S. states have tested positive for a subtype of the bird flu virus called H5N1. One person has also tested positive, a dairy worker in Texas whose only symptom was eye redness. They have made a full recovery. But the real numbers are likely much, much higher, and we believe that for a few reasons. One is that some of the cows testing positive don't have symptoms. This suggests there are more animals with the virus that we just haven't tested because they aren't sick. Another reason is that the virus is showing up in retail milk products. So far, 1 in 5 milk samples tested nationwide are positive for H5N1. Now, a very important caveat is that these samples only contain dead virus fragments. No live virus has been found in them. And that is thanks to pasteurization, which uses high temperature to kill pathogens. It's a different story for raw milk, though. Officials warn people should absolutely avoid raw milk products right now.
Yeah, understandably so. So this all sounds a bit scary numbers-wise, especially since you said the outbreak is probably larger than we realize. Why don't we have a better handle on the scope right now?
It all comes down to a lack of surveillance. We are simply not testing enough cows for the virus. Right now, the only testing requirement is for cows traveling across state lines. Otherwise, farmers are being encouraged, but not required, to test sick cattle. This is concerning because, like I said, cows without symptoms can still be infected. And even if herds appear sick, there is no incentive for farmers to get them tested. Other than covering the cost of the viral test, the U.S. government doesn't compensate farmers in any capacity, not even for the vet bill or the cost of having to close a farm if the test comes back positive. This is all leaving us in the dark about how widespread the outbreak is and how it is spreading amongst cows, both of which are crucial pieces of information if we want to contain the outbreak.
I mean, listening to this, it's hard not to think back to the kind of early days of 2020 and the reports about insufficient surveillance relating to COVID-19. Is there any reason to think there should be a similar level of concern now?
I would say for the average person, there is no reason to panic right now. The risk of bird flu remains very, very, very low for the general public. This is still very much a bird virus. There is no indication that it has adapted to humans. And as long as you are sticking with pasteurized milk products and not raw milk ones and don't interact with dairy cows in the US, you don't have much to worry about personally. However, we should not underestimate the effect it has had on global bird populations. Millions and millions have died as a result of the disease, and that's unlikely to slow down anytime soon.
And now for some quantum batteries. In short, the idea is that by using some of the weirdness of quantum physics, we could make batteries that are way better than any currently in existence. Researchers have been laying down the theoretical foundations for quantum batteries in recent years, and now we might have worked out a way to charge them super fast. Our new assistant news editor, Molly Glick, is here to tell us all about them. Hi, Molly. Welcome to the show.
Hey.
Okay, step one, perhaps. Could you just talk us through what actually makes a battery quantum?
So quantum batteries store and provide energy just like regular electrochemical batteries do. The big difference between the two is where that energy comes from. In regular old electrochemical batteries, like the ones powering your TV remote, energy comes from chemical reactions happening inside them. But in a quantum battery, it runs on some bizarre quantum processes. Right now, we don't yet have a grasp of which specific quantum processes would work best. We're talking batteries built from objects in the still mystical quantum realm, like tiny diamonds with a knocked-out carbon atom at the center. You might even use chunks of light. And our story from Carmela Padovich-Callahan this week covered a new study that explored the quickest way to charge one of these theoretical quantum batteries.
Okay, tell us a bit about that. How does it actually work?
It's actually a really neat example of how when you deal with a quantum object, you can really benefit from its, well, quantumness. The researchers developed a mathematical model to discover how best to charge a quantum battery. They explored using both multiple chargers and a single charger with multiple entry points for the battery. With a regular battery, you just place it into a single charger or through a single entry point. But a quantum battery can take on what's called a quantum superposition state. It could power up in multiple chargers or at multiple points in a single charger, all at the same time. And that speeds up the charging significantly, or at least these new calculations suggest so.
All right, so it's a bit like I could charge my phone faster by plugging it in both in the kitchen and the bedroom at the same time.
Exactly. And that's where you're able to speed up charging. The few quantum batteries that have been tested in preliminary lab experiments from other teams have charged extremely quickly. We're talking much, much more quickly than conventional batteries, and that's made a lot of folks excited. One huge use for full-fledged quantum batteries would be to put them in electric vehicles and make those vehicles charge in just a few minutes. But we're nowhere near that point right now.
Nowhere near sounds familiar. How far away are we, though?
One researcher said we may be 5 or even 10 years away from more advanced experiments, maybe in a light-based quantum battery. The hope is that theoretical studies like this one will help build a recipe for something scientists will actually use in the future. Before even building anything, it's worth remembering that these batteries are so different from conventional batteries that any new findings breaking down their quantumness is worthwhile. And this idea of an object being in multiple places at once is actually something researchers have known for about a century.
Incredible. Batteries made of light, things in multiple places at the same time. It's like living in a fantasy novel or something.
Yeah.
Steampunk. I don't know.
I think we should work out how you can have your battery both at work and at home at the same time.
Yes.
Without you only have one battery, don't need to worry about taking it anywhere. It's always charged super quick.
And it's also
Amazing.
powering things both at home and at the office at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. All right, Tim, you might remember a couple months ago when we talked about how long different kinds of dogs can live.
Yeah, I remember that. We learned that small dogs with boopable snouts tend to live the longest, and the kind of more medium-sized dogs with flat faces, they have a shorter lifespan.
Right. It was very important information. And in the name of fairness, we now have to talk about cats and which of them live the longest. At least in the UK, the longest-lived cat breeds are Burmese and Burmans. Both breeds originate from Burma, as you might guess, and the Burmans look a lot like Burmese, but they have these longer coats. And those breeds have an average life expectancy of about 14 and a half years. And the shortest-lived breeds, on the other hand, are Sphinx cats. They live only on average about 6.7 years. Bengals, they're also down there too at 8.5 years.
Well, that is a really big difference. I didn't realize there was such variety in how long cats live. And then what about cats that aren't any particular breed? How do they fare?
Well, like dogs, it turns out that the crossbreeds have a fairly robust lifespan compared to most purebreds. They live about 12 years if they're female and 10 and a half years if they're males. And yeah, on average, female cats are outliving males in all the breed categories.
So with dogs, we also learned that things like the face length makes a difference to lifespan. Short faces were a really distinct trait of shorter-lived dogs. Did they find anything similar with cats?
Surprisingly, no. As one of the researchers in the study said, cats are, quote, boring, though I disagree, because they're mostly not bred for anything beyond the length or color of their fur. You just don't really see tons of purebreds prized for, twisted up spines or flat muzzles. But the researchers also pointed out that cats are just very under-researched compared to dogs. They're kind of invisible to science, and it means that even this basic data on cat lifespan might advance our understanding of their health and needs. And even just knowing your cat might live 12 years on average could help pet owners make better decisions about their well-being.
All right, well, we talk a lot about some of the truly stressful news about the climate crisis on this show, as we should, but I also think it's important for us to talk about good progress too when there is some. And there's a new report out this week about the progress in converting to renewable energy sources, and there's actually loads of really good news in there.
I really love to hear that. What have you got? Throw some numbers at me.
Okay, well, I think the big takeaway is that wind and solar power are rapidly crowding out gas and coal in the world's mix of energy sources, especially after last year. Renewables generated a record 30.3% of global electricity in 2023, and that's up from 29.4% in 2022. So the first time we flipped over that 30% mark.
Amazing. So nearly a third. And can we thank any country in particular for this new record?
We can, and it's China, which really shouldn't surprise you given how many times our esteemed colleague James Deneen reported on China's massive investment in renewables last year. But it was also a team effort as countries around the world are contributing to a shift to more renewable energy. And even though the demand overall for power is still growing, this rise of renewables mean that we should see less power generated by fossil fuels in 2024. And that would be the first time ever when there wasn't also an economic crisis or a pandemic at play. That means it's very possible 2023 was a turning point in the world's consumption of fossil fuels.
Wow. I love that idea that maybe we're like on a downturn for fossil fuel use.
Yeah.
What kind of impact might this make on emissions from electricity going forward?
Well, it does depend a bit. But assuming hydropower generation recovers from last year's droughts, we might see power emissions fall by as much as 4% this year. That said, analysts are still saying countries must roll out renewable energy at an even faster pace over the coming years if we are to meet climate goals, particularly that kind of ideal cap we're aiming for of capping warming at 1.5 degrees. And if we want to have any hope of reaching that, then models suggest we need wind and solar power alone to deliver 40% of electricity worldwide by the end of the decade. And that's more than triple what they're currently doing.
All right, Tim, how are your London friends now that you're back home from 2 years in the United States?
To be honest, I could have done a slightly better job of getting back in touch with people. You know what it's like. You've not spoken for a while and then you hesitate to make the first move.
I totally get it, Tim, and science may have an answer for you. We have a story this week about how to get back in touch with your long-lost friends, which, as you mentioned, it can kind of feel risky and stressful. No one wants to stick their neck out. You could find yourself ignored or worse, rejected or, having to explain why you didn't keep in touch. But psychologists, themselves a pair of long-lost friends, have run a massive survey of 2,500 people to understand what exactly you might want to do in this circumstance. And Tim, the first thing they learned is that most people would be really happy to hear from their long-lost friends, including your friends.
You don't know them.
It's true. But people were also way less willing to be the one to make the first move. In fact, they were about as willing to reach out to old friends as they were to total strangers. And overall, this was about as appealing to them as taking out the garbage.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. Were there any insights in this study as to why it gets so uncomfortable? You'd think an old friend would be easy to reach out to.
Well, they theorized that old friends really do just start to feel like strangers. Other research has found that a lot of what makes us feel close relies on sharing interests, worldview, sense of humor, other so-called pillars. And when we don't interact, we don't have a sense of what we share anymore, even if nothing has actually changed. But there's good news too. The same team tried to help the participants overcome this anxiety about reconnecting. So they asked people to basically practice first. They spent 3 minutes sending messages to close friends, feeling all the good feelings of people you're already close to. And then they spent 3 minutes just drafting a message to an old friend they'd lost touch with, just drafting it. And participants who warmed up with close friends were 2/3 more likely to actually send the messages that they had drafted. They were also generally glad they had sent those messages. The researchers described them as, quote, over the moon. So maybe some positive tips here to get you going, Tim.
Yeah, I feel very motivated. If I know you, expect a message from me very soon if you've not heard from me for a while.
All right, that's it for this week. You can read all the stories we've talked about today in the show notes, and there's much more like it on our website, newscientist.com.
Plus, if you like the great stories we're bringing you, please give us a rating or review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We'll be back next week, but that's bye for now.
Bye.
This podcast is produced by OG Podcasts. Find out more at ogpodcasts.co.uk.